This is a 749S 2003, and I'm going to do a throttle position sensor baseline on it. This is not a Ducati procedure. It's a procedure that we pretty much stole from Jason at Section 8 Superbikes back in the day. I had started playing with TPS settings on these things, but the procedure that Jason came up with was much better. When we first got 999s, we found that 999S models in particular had a real stumble as you tried to take off. You sort of let the clutch out and it would go as you just let it out. And I later sort of realised with other things that was because they were too rich. And on the S's, it still had the sintered clutches. They were quite horrible to ride sometimes. We had one that I had to ride on a wet day and I could hardly get it moving without spinning the back wheel or stalling it. Sort of was the options. It was horrible. So we had a set of throttle bodies that came off a 749. I think they were porous, maybe, really early on, just warranty ones. And so I started playing with them one day, and back in those days with the Mathesis, I think you could power the throttle bodies up on the bench so you could do a TPS set off a bike. Not really sure how it worked with the Linear TPS now, but anyway, you could do that. And so I powered it up and I worked out that the throttle was open about 65 millivolts. And that was 1.3 degrees. And then I started playing with it more. And I don't know how I managed to work out what 2.3 was, but I worked out 2.3 was about 100 millivolts. And so from that, I made an equation up. We worked out what the relationship was between degrees and millivolts. And I had a procedure going where you could reach into the airbox on the other side and unplug the TPS and plug a jumper box we had for the Mathesis into it. And we'd set a multimeter up and read the voltage that way, but it wasn't terribly easy. And I showed Dano how to do it once and he scratched his hand on the airbox and he was a bit cranky. So we figured that we wouldn't do that anymore. And the procedure that Jason had was much, much easier. So that's what I'm going to run through now. This is a 749. This bike probably doesn't need it, but the fact is the last time I had a bike that did need it, 999, was probably a few years ago now. So I thought, it's here, I'll take the chance to film it. The reason this one doesn't need it is because there's two sets of throttle bodies for 999s, or 749, 999 series. There's one part number that is 749 and one part number that is 999. And the difference is just the throttle opening. So when they're made by whoever makes them for Morelli, their final step of the manufacturing procedure would be to set the throttle at a given angle, and that would then define whether it's 749 or 999. They're exactly the same apart from that. But what seemed to happen somewhere along the line, and I thought it might have been Euro and USA, but I don't even think that's true because there's certainly 999s out there that were correct because the map bikes that the mapping was done on were obviously correct because when you do this procedure, it makes a 999 run much better sometimes. The S's in particular, it made them much nicer to ride at low speed. So the bikes they used for development were obviously correct. And because there was 5 9M ECUs in the early models and then 5 AMs from 2005 onwards, they did at least 2 sets of mapping and all of them responded the same way to this adjustment. So there were certainly 999s with the right throttle bodies, but all the ones that we got in Australia, at least, I can say, had 749 throttle bodies on them. And the only difference with that is the fact that the throttle is set at 1.3 degrees as the basis, not 2.3. But when you do a TPS reset, because it's electronic, it tells the ECU that that is 2.3. And it's only 1 degree, but it can make enough of a difference at low throttle openings to make the bikes run richer. And you can adjust it out with the idle trimmer, all that sort of stuff, but it just made them run better doing this procedure. First thing to do is get some free play into the throttle cables. Throttle cable adjustments up here. Usually the fast idle cable isn't an issue. There seems to be enough free play in that to be fine the way it is. So we'll just wind that adjuster off. And I put a lot of free play in them, as much as you can. I mean, we'll check once it's all wound off to make sure the throttle is actually locking shut. You can feel it in the mechanism. If it locks shut, then it's fully closed. That's the throttle cable adjustment wound off. I've got my instructions from my website, so I make sure I don't forget anything. Okay, free play throttle cable, make sure fast idle lever is off. The balance screw on the front throttle body, we wind it clockwise one turn, and that opens the front throttle more than the rear, like so, so that this one at the rear can snap shut and be shut fully, and the one at the front is open a bit, so it's not having any influence on it. That's why we do that. Now, if we go into the airbox, this screw head here, which is 7mm head with a slot in it, that's the throttle balance or throttle synchronization adjustment. And we want to wind that one full turn clockwise to open the horizontal throttle body up more than the rear. Now you can theoretically do this by getting down the side. I'm going to put the camera down for this because I need two hands. I need to really hold this in place. So clockwise, one turn. There is a big rubber cap in the side of the airbox down here that you can pull out to access that screw, theoretically. I think I'd pulled it out once and I found I couldn't do anything, and you'll just hate yourself trying to get it back in. So I pull the air runner off and you have nice access in that way. So that is our balance screw wound off, our throttle with heaps of free play. The next thing to do is drill a hole on top of the airbox. The location of this hole, in my notes, it says, drill a hole 45mm to the left of the number 1, 2461, and 5mm back from the base of the numbers. Sounds easy enough. So 45. I might have done this originally with the airbox pulled apart. I certainly wouldn't pull the airbox apart to do this. You'll really hate yourself if you want to try and pull these airboxes apart. Now the size of the hole that you drill is going to depend mostly on what you're going to plug the hole with. I remember Bruce Myers telling me that they used to use these plugs for this job. And that's a really good idea, but I don't have any of those. So I'm going to use this little grommet. It's about 15.5mm, which is probably 5/8. So I've got a 5/8 drill. Normally we would use an 8mm plug, but with 8mm, you're really not going to see anything, and I'm doing this to show what I'm doing, so we'll go a big one and see what happens. Okay. If you go slow, you can probably catch all the swarf as it comes out. Just give it all a good blow off when you're done. If we can get some light down in here and see what we're looking at. If you look down in this hole, you can see there a screw with a little head full of yellow paint. It's a 2.5mm grub screw, and that is the idle stop, or the throttle stop for the vertical cylinder. And that's what we need to adjust. So what we need to do is wind that all the way out. And make sure that the throttle itself is locking shut. If it's locking shut, we know it's fully closed. So the first thing you need to do is just chip the paint out of the way, which I usually just give it a whack, and it goes through the paint. What I'm going to use for the diagnostic, laptop, I'm just using Guzzi Diag because that's what most of you will probably be using to do this. I would normally just use the Axone. So this is Guzzi Diag, which is the same as IAW Diag, but IAW Diag's sort of generic. I've called it a Grisso because I know it's a 5 Series ECU. The PF1C is a Linear TPS. PF1C is actually the little one that bolts on. This is a IPF2C/B, which is one you just push in. So you can't adjust these TPSs at all. And what we're doing here is we're making sure that the opening from fully closed is a certain value. And it doesn't matter what the voltage is. We're not even measuring voltage here. When I first started out, I was measuring voltage, but the voltage itself is irrelevant. What is relevant is how far the throttle is open from fully closed. So we'll just log into this. And I'll tell you, 1.3 degrees. I know that because I did a TPS reset in this bike a while ago. So what we'll do is we'll just wind this idle stop out. It's half, 1, half, 2, 2.5 turns out, and we got 0 on the throttle angle. And so that means theoretically it's fully shut. It might even be less than 0, who knows. If this was a 999, you would expect to see 0.6, 0.7, 0.8, 0.9 degrees, maybe even 1 degree there. And that's sort of the tell. The 999s, the throttle opening is not what it should be. So what we do now is, just with the throttle, make sure it's jamming shut. If it's not jamming shut, it might be a fast idle issue. It might be a fast idle issue, I think. Stick my arm in here. If I can sort of pull the throttle shut and get it to jam, I'll call it okay. But I'm not sure. Yeah, I think it's, yep, it's locking shut. So I'm just pushing the throttle lever, not too hard, but gently to make sure that it is sort of locking shut. And it is locking shut at that. So there's a little bit of movement in the fast idle we can feel is not impacting it, which is good because the fast idles are quite annoying to deal with. You've got to pull the switch block off to get the lever out just to make sure the cable's got plenty of free play. So we now have throttle fully closed. What we do now is we go into View, Actors. I don't usually use Guzzi Diag, but I'm doing it this way just to... Oh, there's no TPS reset. So I'm back with IAW Diag this time, which has a TPS reset. I really don't understand what happened to TPS reset in the Guzzi Diag. I found a tutorial on YouTube and it had a TPS reset for a Brevra 1100, but I went into that and it wasn't there, so I don't know. Anyway, 5 AM, sorry, I've got it set for a 5.9M ECU and a PF1C TPS, which is the Linear TPS. Not actually the same one as this, but it's the only Linear TPS option it gives for a 5.9. So we've gone into the Actors and click on TPS reset. Start. TPS reset, okay. We'll go back to the measurements. We've got 1.3 degrees. So now I'm just going to wind this in. And hear the little click, and the click is the throttle blade unsticking. Wind it in till we get 2.6. And when I see 2.6, happy there, I'm going to do another TPS reset. TPS reset done. And now we're back to 1.3 degrees. So now we can disconnect, turn the bike off, get the laptop out of the way, back with a 16mm hole. Hopefully it's just enough to get this thing to go in happily. If not, I'll have to turn the camera off and start swearing at it. Okay, that's our grommet in. What I usually do is put a bit of tape over it. What we would do is get some red paint and put a little dot on the airbox just above the hole here to access the air bleed. So I had a red dot there. It meant we'd done this. So now going backwards from all that, we have to wind the balance screw back one turn counterclockwise. I will check the balance once I'm done, but this is just putting back to where it was, if you like. So I should be a starting point. Back to where it was. We'll adjust the throttle cable free play. Back to where it was. And usually on these you end up with the adjuster almost all the way out. It's always pretty common. Fast idle still works. Throttle cable free play. It's good. That's it. So that's the TPS baseline. And as I said, it's not a Ducati procedure, but it's something that we found that worked well. And particularly for us, because our 999s here in Australia appeared to have 749 throttle bodies.